Good morning, everybody. Today we are going to take up William Cooper's poem On the Receipt of My Mother's Picture. It's a very beautiful poem written in memory of his mother, the poet's mother, and it carries autobiographical overtones. Today, what I am going to discuss with you is Cooper's return home, remembering and working through in On the Receipt of My Mother's Picture. This is an article by Vincent Newey. And now let us concentrate on the views of Newey. The concept of home was much on Cooper's mind throughout his career. And how instinctively his response to domesticity can blend personal psychology with not only moral but socio-political conviction has been finely revealed in this poem also. He looks back to the happy man of classical tradition, the Horatian ethos of civilized retreat, and forward to the Victorian middle-class creed of home, family, and religion as the cornerstones of social well-being. Thoughts of home, however, were not without anxiety for Cooper. Quote, "We are never more in danger than when we think ourselves most secure," unquote. This is what he feels about home and domesticity. In his long poem, another poem, The Castaway, he suggests that home is a shifting site, not too much a place of settlement as the condition of being settled, which is to say inwardly resilient, supported by others and capable of moving forward. Home is at the same time constantly at risk, open to being suddenly lost and forever felt. Now, all these perspectives on home are somewhere present in On the Receipt of My Mother's Picture out of Norfolk, except the socio-political dimension. Composed in 1790 but not published till 1798, this poem belongs preeminently to the theme of self-contemplation in Cooper's writings. In On the Receipt of My Mother's Picture, he remains the mental traveler still, but journeys into his past, present, and future. Near the beginning, he recalls a time when the props were snatched from under him, insofar as they consisted in maternal tenderness. "My mother, when I learned that thou wast dead, say, wast thou conscious of the tears I shed? Hovered thy spirit over thy sorrowing son? Wretch, even then, life's journey just begun. I heard the bell tolled on thy burial day. I saw the heresy that bore thee slowly away, and turning from my nursery window drew a long, long sigh, and wept a last adieu. Thy maidens grieved themselves at my concern, often gave me promise of thy quick return. What ardently I wished, I long believed, and disappointed still was still deceived. By expectation, every day beguiled, dupe of tomorrow even from a child. Thus many a sad tomorrow came and went, till all my stock of infant sorrow spent. I learned at last submission to my lot, but though I less deplored thee, never forgot." Reading this, we may wonder if Cooper's experience of his mother's death during his 6th year set up the mechanism for both his later serial dependence on caring women like Mrs. Unwin and Lady Austen and Lady Hesketh, and his implacable expectation of repeated blows and untimely, ultimately damnation. Whatever the answer, the event must have been a traumatic one, this is true. For his part, the adult Cooper does recapture the child's bewilderment and futile longing in the stark, dreamlike images of the funeral day, and slow moving seesaw rhythms of its aftermath of sad tomorrows, and sees this drama as the first passage in a history of adversity. The continuity implied in Wretch Even Then, life's journey just begun, is underscored by Dupe of Tomorrow, even from a child. Itself is the perfect example of Cooper's powers of compressed formulation. It is important to emphasize, however, that in the moment of the poem's composition, at the start of his last decade, Cooper is not troubled or unsettled by viewing the dark side of his existence. On the contrary, no longer vulnerable to being either still deceived or in a posture of submission, he embraces his lot with wide awake equanimity. On the receipt of my mother's picture is, as we shall understand more fully in due course, a poem very much about mental strength and stability. All memory is in some measure recreation, and all recreation involves to some extent invention and interpretation. In this poem, Cooper writes a script of and for his life, and in so doing brings it psychologically under control. Scripts seems a good word, for the lines quoted above can read like opening scenes or flashbacks in a film. While Anne Botham's surprise gift prompted in her cousin a process of private remembrance and contemplation that brought decided therapeutic gains, the text which enacts that process makes Cooper's life and mind eminently consumable by others. The fact would not have been lost on the relatives and friends, who no doubt encouraged publication of the poem 8 years after it was written, when as the end approached, they were beginning to take steps to ensure future interest in Cooper's singular biography as well as enhance his standing as a poet. What is happening in On the Receipt of My Mother's Picture then is not simply remembering but working through. The cathartic method that the poem highlights, where repressed memories are brought to the surface in the poem so as to be beneficially discharged along the path of conscious activity. The poem helps us to characterize the habit of mind on show in On the Receipt of My Mother's Picture. However, the poem also connects directly in this aspect with a genre of which Cooper had himself been an exponent. It can be called spiritual autobiography, of which the primary motivation had always been the search for stability through self-knowledge and the discovery of patterns in the history of one's inner life. Cooper, in fact, does not raise the possibility of meeting his mother in heaven. May I but meet thee on that peaceful shore? The parting word shall pass my lips no more. This, however, is a gesture of wishful thinking. The prevailing impression is of one patiently resigned to living outside the bounds of grace. The significant continuity in Cooper's existence is of unaccountable affliction. Wretch even then, life's journey just begun. The word wretch is a common term of self-reference in Protestant Calvinistic discourse, as famously at the beginning of John Newton's hymn, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." This is very much the picture he draws as the poem nears its conclusion. While his mother has safely reached her heaven of repose, he flounders continually in a sea of troubles and hostile force with scant hope of a happy outcome. Thou, as a gallant bark from Albion's coast, The storms all weathered and the oceans crossed, shoots into port at some well-heavened isle, where spices breathe and brighter seasons smile. There sits, quiescent on the floods that show her beauteous form reflected clear below, while airs impregnated with incense play around her, fanning lights her streamers gay. So thou, with sails how swift, hast reached the shore where tempests never beat nor billows roar. But me, scarce hoping to attain that rest, always from port withheld, always distressed. Me, howling winds drive devious, tempest tossed, sails ripped, seams opening wide, and compass lost, and day by day some current's thwarting force sets me more distant from a prosperous course. The contrast between blessed peace and relentless turbulence is obvious in these lines. There is, however, also a telling and barely perceptible formal difference between Cooper's representation of his mother and himself. She is given an extended simile that conjures a compelling, strange, and stately beauty, but remains separate from her person. He, on the other hand, dissolves into the image of a tempest tossed, directionless, and ill fated vessel. There is at the core of, on the receipt of my mother's picture, a contradiction between subject matter, which is Cooper's helplessness and distress, and the confidence and equanimity with which it is expressed. Negation and affirmation are intertwined. The above quoted passage ends with Cooper's declaration of pride in his parents' attainment of the rewards of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever his own fate, arrive what may to me, itself a strong-minded gesture in its outgoing spirit. My boast is not that I deduced my birth from lions enthrall and rulers of the earth, but higher far my proud pretensions rise. The son of parents passed into the skies. All the same, he does bid for and accomplish lasting earthly success in the noble order of poets, while also in these particular lines, certainly reminding us of and perhaps taking a subterranean pleasure in the fact that he did descend from rulers of the earth. Blessed be the art that can immortalize, the art that baffled time's tyrannic claim to quench it, says Cooper in salutation of the painter's skill that keeps alive his mother's image and influence. His art in poetry does the same for his own as well as hers. He is in this anything but dupe of tomorrow. The negative content of Cooper's vision of his life then is made affirmative from within by the quality of its expression. Just as importantly, it is also balanced from without by acts of positive recollection, the use of memory as a means of grace. At one stage, in yet another instant of the strong-mindedness that emerges as the poem progresses, Cooper refuses the temptation to wish the happy years of his infancy back again, since that would be harsh repayment for his mother's love. I should ill requite thee to constrain thy unbound spirit into bonds again. Yet, self-abnegation does not preclude but exist alongside the pursuit of self-interest in the poem. The portrait has immediately prompted in Cooper the dual purpose of paying belated tribute to a parent and seeking solace for himself. Faithful remembrancer, who biddest me honor with an artless song, affectionate, a mother lost so long, I will obey. On and on. And while that face renews my filial grief, fancy shall weave a charm for my relief, shall steep me in Elysian reverie, a momentary dream that thou art she. As we shall find, and as Cooper subsequently suggests, solace and relief are hardly sufficient to describe the harvest he reaps from the recovery of scenes from the period before his mother's death. We shall get closer if we borrow lines from a poet whom he influenced. There are in our existence spots of time which with distinct preeminence retain a vivifying virtue, a virtue by which pleasure is enhanced and which lifts us up when fallen. Cooper discovers in early childhood a fund of uplifting moments and in himself the ability to assess them through imagination. And on the receipt of my mother's picture, Cooper comes home. He locates there, though not an answer, certainly a palliative riposte to his darker convictions. Where once we dwelt, our name is heard no more. Children, not thine, have trod my nursery floor. The recollections are framed by a distant and poignant elegiac perspective that throws into relief the immediacy with which they are seen and felt. They are extraordinarily vivid. Their factual detail has proved invaluable to biographers of Cooper's childhood. But like all memories, in some degree, they inevitably bear the impress of the adult mind through which they are mediated, its leanings and preoccupations. They speak of the psychology of the present as well as the events and settings of the past. The first of them sets a tone. And where the gardener Robin day by day drew me to school along the public way, delighted with my bauble coach and wrapped in scarlet mantle warm and velvet cap, and on and on. Quaintness and visual clarity are important features of delineation, but most striking here is Cooper's interiority to sensations of simple delight, warmth and softness, and protective enclosure. The toy coach in which he was pulled along, the cloak, the cap, etc. The poet perceives and re-experiences a world of unthinking security and unself-conscious pleasure. Then added to these, as the focus narrows, are intimacy and dependency. Thy nightly visit to my chambermaid, that thou mightest know me safe and warmly laid. Thy morning bounties ever I left my home, the biscuit or confectionery plum, the fragrant waters on my cheeks bestowed by thy own hand, till fresh they shone and glowed, and on and on. The trace of the erotic within these episodes then grows even more pronounced in the final one, where the sense of touch comes to the fore. The hours when playing with thy vestures tissued flowers, the violet, the pink, and jessamine, I pricked them into paper with a pin, and thou wast happier than myself, the while would softly speak and stroke my head and smile, and on and on. This is the only one of the vignettes in which the infant Cooper does not play an entirely passive role. His act of copying the flower patterns into the paper suggests the first stirrings of the poet in him. The attending mother then becomes his muse. We may again speculate on in the poem. The early years are for Cooper a rich landscape of innocence, a paradise he can for a space re-inhabit. Not only that, he talks of the evidences of his mother's kindness and love as something to be read from within himself. The record fear that memory keeps, all this is still legible in memory's page, etc. This is more than a convenient metaphor. As he writes the poem, Cooper creates out of the past a text that operates and is also interpreted as part of the process of working through the story of his life and present situation. It is a text, moreover, whose benefits and benign influence will stretch into the future, that is, which not only still outlive many a storm that has effaced 1,000 other themes, but is still to be so to my latest age. There is, to put it differently, a cluster of continuums woven into the tapestry of the poem, set over against those of a conviction and an imagery of lifelong adversity, is that constituted by the arc of Cooper's mnemonic redemption of his infant past. This arc mirrors in its virtual continuities, spatial and temporal, the constant flow of love that memory ascribes to his mother and is at last made potential by the present. The future is a salient element in Cooper's summary overview of what the poem has accomplished, which in itself an abstract working through of the preceding substantive one. After the recollections of infancy, he had returned to the theme of obligation and elegiac tribute, for the thought of his mother's constant flow of love, adding joy to duty, makes him glad to pay such honor to thee as my numbers may. This, however, is not where he places the emphasis in the concluding lines. And now farewell. Time, unrevoked, has run his wonted course, and what I wished is done. By contemplation's help, not sought in vain, I seemed to have lived my childhood over again, to have renewed the joys that once were mine, without the sin of violating thine. And while the wings of fancy still are free, and I can view this mimic show of thee, time has but half succeeded in his theft. Thyself removed, thy power to soothe me left. Lived and renewed are strong words, exactly true to the nature of the passages of retrospection, while soothe catches precisely the reflective calm that presides in this closing paragraph. Psychologically understood, the ending shows a perfect balance of the mind, mature mind rather. Cooper accepts that time cannot in reality be revoked and paradise truly regained. It can, however, be accessed on the wings of fancy. Though the power of Cooper's mother and the mimic show is brought finally to the center, the poem bears witness above all to the recuperative agency of memory, imagination, and reasoning. As the final couplets imply, moreover, this force, albeit vulnerable itself to the vagaries and passing of time, while the wings of fancy still are free, can be repeatedly summoned and applied in the service of the well-being of the self. Throughout, we have seen a detailed analysis on the receipt of my mother's picture as a transitional poem, adopting the conventions of 18th century elegy, but presenting overall a new genre. A varied but integral process of memory, thought, anticipation, and feeling, which remains closely interwoven with the outer scene. In the course of the meditation, the lyric speaker achieves an insight, faces up to the tragic loss, comes to a moral decision, or resolves an emotional problem. Often, the poem rounds upon itself to end where it began, at the outer scene, but with an altered mood and deepened understanding, which is the result of the intervening meditation. This is M.H. Abrams' classic definition of what he terms the greater romantic lyric. Finally, suffice it to say on this occasion that the picture with which he stays closely interwoven is both inspiration and anchor of a meditation that, through a series of twists and turns, views back and forth, reflections, and weighing ups, achieves not just one but all of the things Abrams states may be achieved. Facing up to tragic loss, that is, the death of a mother, the death of innocence, the prospective loss of heaven. Reaching a moral decision, subordinating his wishes to the claims of filial duty, resolving an emotional problem, that is, learning to cope with his inheritance of affliction, deepened understanding, not least of the power and the limits of fancy, etc. To set on the receipt of my mother's picture alongside the greater romantic lyric illuminates the nature of its originality and place in literary history. If we see it as a model performance in the psychodrama, the working through that Freud taught us to recognize as a crucial resource in the battle for self-knowledge and stable selfhood, we understand with new insight its modernity and universal relevance. Thank you so much.